A sniper targeted the Korean Mafia boss, until a black waitress noticed one detail. The late afternoon sun hung low over Sunset Boulevard, painting the cafe patio in shades of amber and gold. It was the kind of Los Angeles evening that made danger feel like a distant concept, something that happened in other neighborhoods to other people. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee and exhaust fumes, a combination so distinctly LA that tourists photographed it without realizing why. Amina Diallo moved between the outdoor tables with efficient grace, balancing a tray of drinks against her hip. Her dark curls were pulled back with a patterned headscarf, protection against the heat and a small piece of home she carried with her. She'd worked at the cafe for 2 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the place. The regulars who came for the Wi-Fi and stayed for hours. The couples who treated it like their personal office for relationship drama. The business types who checked their watches more than their phones. But the man at table 9 was different, and Amina's instincts hummed with quiet warning. Jae-sung sat with military stillness, his posture too controlled for someone supposedly relaxing. He'd arrived 30 minutes earlier in a car that cost more than Amina made in a year, ordered black coffee without glancing at the menu, and hadn't touched it since. Everything about him was deliberate, the perfectly tailored black shirt, the way his hair was slicked back with precision, the tattoo that curved just above his collarbone before disappearing beneath fabric. He was dangerous in the way expensive things were dangerous. Beautiful, cold, and built to cut. Amina approached his table, her professional smile in place. "Can I get you anything else?" He looked up, and his eyes were darker than they should have been in the golden light. "I'm fine. Thank you." His English carried no accent, but something in the cadence suggested it wasn't his first language. Amina noticed his hands, no rings, no watch, no phone on the table. Everything that could identify him had been deliberately removed. "You sure? Coffee's getting cold," she offered, keeping her tone light. "I prefer it that way." A slight smile touched his mouth, transforming his face from severe to merely guarded. Amina nodded and turned toward the next table, but something nagged at her awareness. Her mother's voice echoed from childhood. "When the world gets too quiet, that's when you listen hardest." The patio was full, conversation, laughter, the street musician tuning his guitar nearby. Normal sounds, normal afternoon, except for one thing, the birds. Amina's steps slowed as she realized what was missing. The ficus trees across the street always held sparrows and finches, their constant chatter a background rhythm she'd stopped consciously hearing. But now nothing. No chirping, no rustling winds. The branches were empty. Her gaze swept the street with the practiced casualness of someone who'd learned to observe without being obvious. A skill from her uncle's convenience store in a rougher neighborhood, where looking directly at trouble got you hurt, but missing it got you worse. That's when her eyes caught it. Not on the street itself, but in the reflection of the cafe's window. High up in the office building across Sunset Boulevard, something flashed in the mirrored glass. Brief, controlled, too precise to be coincidence. Sunlight on a scope lens. Amina's heart kicked against her ribs, but her body moved before her mind caught up. She adjusted her grip on the tray, changed direction, and headed straight for table 9. Jae-sung's phone buzzed. He answered without greeting, and Amina watched his entire body shift, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, his free hand curling into a fist on the table. He was getting warning. He was about to move. She was 3 steps away when she saw it clearly. A faint red, no bigger than a fingertip, dancing across the white wall behind his chair. Then it shifted, tracking, searching, hunting. Amina didn't shout, didn't freeze. She stumbled deliberately and let the entire tray tip forward. Iced tea, water, and coffee cascaded directly into Jae-sung's lap as the cafe window behind him exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces. No one at the cafe noticed the silence. That was the detail, not the screaming that came after, not the way customers dove under tables or the mother who shielded her twins with her body. Not even the second shot that never came, leaving everyone suspended in the terrible space between one bullet and the possibility of more. It was the silence before. Amina hit the ground hard, Jae-sung's hand locked around her wrist, pulling her down with controlled force that left no room for resistance. Glass rained over the table where his head had been seconds before, glittering like deadly snow in the afternoon sun. "Stay down," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. But Amina's heart was a war drum against her ribs, and her mind was already working through what she'd seen. Southwest angle, elevated position, single shot. Jae-sung's eyes snapped to hers, not in shock, but in calculation. "You saw the setup. I saw the reflection." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or reassessment. Around them, the cafe descended into chaos. Someone was crying. Someone else was screaming for help. A phone clattered to the ground, still playing music. Jae-sung used the confusion like cover, pulling Amina through the kitchen where staff pressed themselves against stainless steel counters, eyes wide with terror. The back alley smelled like grease and hot asphalt. A black sedan waited with its engine already running, which meant this wasn't improvised. This was protocol. Amina tried to stop. "Wait. I can't just. If you stay, you become evidence," Jae-sung said, his grip firm but not bruising. "If you come with me, you might survive." Might. That word carried weight. It wasn't a promise. It was probability. Against every rational instinct screaming at her to run toward the sirens approaching in the distance, Amina got in the car. The city blurred past the tinted windows. They merged into traffic on Sunset, then side streets, then wider boulevards again. The driver never spoke. Jae-sung made 3 phone calls in rapid Korean, his tone clipped and precise. Not panicked. Not angry. Just efficient. Amina's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "Someone who was supposed to die today." Jae-sung pocketed his phone and turned to face her fully. "My name is Jae-sung, and you just interfered with an open contract." "A contract?" The word felt foreign in her mouth. "You mean someone paid to have me killed? Professional work. The kind that doesn't miss." His gaze was steady, assessing. "Except it did miss. Because of you." Amina's throat was dry. "Your crime." A faint smile touched his lips, lacking warmth but acknowledging truth. "That obvious?" The car was already running. "You knew where the exit was. You—" She stopped herself. "What happens to me now?" Jae-sung was quiet for a moment, watching the city slide past. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Amina understand exactly how dangerous this situation was. "In my world, witnesses are liabilities. And liabilities don't survive long enough to testify." He paused. "But you're not just a witness. You're proof I was vulnerable, and proof I survived. So I'm evidence either way." "Yes." The word hung between them like a blade. "However," Jae-sung continued, his tone shifting slightly, "you think differently than my people. You saw something they would have missed. That makes you useful." He met her eyes. "And in my position, useful people stay alive longer than inconvenient ones." Amina's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "Who wanted you dead?" "That's the complicated part." Jae-sung leaned back against the leather seat. "This wasn't rival organizations. This was internal. Someone close. Someone who knows my routines, my security protocols, my vulnerabilities." "Family," Amina said quietly, understanding dawning. "A trusted lieutenant named Byung-chul. Second generation, like me. We grew up in the same organization." Something cold entered Jae-sung's expression. "He's been planning this for months, siphoning resources, making promises to people who want my position. The contract was supposed to make it legitimate." The car turned into an underground parking structure, descending into shadows. "So what now?" Amina asked. Jae-sung looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Now you learn to stay alive. Because the moment I walked away from that cafe with you, Byung-chul's people started looking for both of us." The car stopped. The driver opened the door. And Amina realized with terrifying clarity that her survival now depended entirely on staying close to the man she'd just saved. The man whose world she'd accidentally stepped into, with no clear way out. The safe house sat on the 20th floor of a building in Koreatown, windows facing west toward the sprawl of Los Angeles. From this height, the city looked almost peaceful, endless lights stretching toward the ocean, traffic flowing like slow rivers of gold and red. Amina stood at the window while Jae-sung's people moved through the apartment with quiet efficiency. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't acknowledge her beyond brief, assessing glances. Men in dark clothing who spoke in low Korean, checking sight lines, securing exits, sweeping for devices she couldn't name. This was their world. She was an anomaly in it. "You'll stay in the second bedroom," Jae-sung said, appearing beside her. He'd changed clothes, black tactical pants, a fitted shirt that suggested he expected more trouble. "Don't leave this floor. Don't make phone calls. Don't go near the windows after dark." Amina turned from the view. "How long?" "Until Byung-chul makes his next move. Or until I make mine." His expression was unreadable. Whichever comes first. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand he take her to the police, to her apartment, anywhere that wasn't here. But the memory of that laser dot tracking across the wall stopped the words in her throat. "I need to call my manager. My roommate. Someone will. Your phone is gone. Your apartment is being watched. Your manager thinks you witnessed a robbery and are helping police." Jae-sung's tone wasn't cruel, just factual. "You don't exist outside this room right now. That's what keeps you breathing." The weight of it pressed down on her chest. Invisible. Erased. Proof. Over the next 2 days, Amina learned the rhythm of the safe house. The men rotated in shifts, 6-hour intervals. They ate standing up, slept in chairs, spoke in a verbal shorthand that eliminated everything except essential information. Jae-sung barely slept at all, moving between phone calls and laptop screens, his jaw tight with the kind of focus that suggested he was fighting a war on multiple fronts. Amina watched. It was what she did best. What had kept her alive in neighborhoods where looking away could get you hurt. What made her good at her job. Reading customers, anticipating needs, noticing the small shifts that others missed. On the third morning, she saw it. "That silver sedan," she said quietly, standing near the window as dawn broke over the city. "The one parked on 8th Street. One of Jae-sung's men. Stocky, scar across his eyebrow. Glanced at her, then away. Dismissive. "It's been there for 40 minutes, Amina continued. "Same spot. Engine running. You can tell by the exhaust." Jae-sung looked up from his laptop. So it circled the block 3 times yesterday afternoon. Different driver, same car. And it's parked exactly where it has line of sight to this building's main entrance." She kept her voice level. "Could be nothing. Could be pattern." Jae-sung stood, moving to the window. He studied the street below for a long moment, then spoke rapid Korean to his men. 2 of them left immediately. He turned to Amina. "How long have you been tracking that vehicle?" "Since yesterday. I don't have much else to do." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. "What else have you noticed?" Amina hesitated. She wasn't part of this. Wasn't trained for this. But she was here, and being useful meant staying alive. "Your security changes shift at 6-hour intervals." "Exactly. Noberiashin." She met his eyes. Someone watching would know that. Would know the 4-minute window when rotation happens and nobody's fully alert yet. "We've used that protocol for years." Then someone's had years to learn it. The words hung in the air between them. Jae-sung was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone and made a call. More rapid Korean, his tone sharp with authority. When he finished, he looked at Amina with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how small the room felt. "You think like prey," he said. "I think like someone who learned how to survive." Amina corrected him, though her hands were shaking slightly. "There's a difference." "Yes." Jae-sung tilted his head, studying her. "There is." That evening, when an attempted breach occurred at the building's service entrance, timed precisely during shift rotation, it was Amina who heard the elevator mechanism engage 2 floors below when it shouldn't have. Her warning gave Jae-sung's people the 30 seconds they needed to respond. No one died, but someone had tried. Later, as the safe house settled into tense quiet, Jae-sung sat across from Amina at the small dining table. "You're not hiding anymore," he said simply. Amina's chest tightened. She understood what he meant. What had shifted? She wasn't just proof he'd survived. She wasn't just a liability to be managed. She was being relied on, and that terrified her more than any bullet. The attack on Jae-sung's convoy happened on the 5th day. Amina learned about it through fragments, terse phone calls in Korean, the way tension crystallized in the safe house like frost spreading across glass. 3 vehicles ambushed on the 110 freeway. 2 men injured. The cargo they'd been transporting, cash, she assumed, though no one said it explicitly, gone. Jae-sung stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, his knuckles white where they gripped the frame. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. They knew the route. They knew the timing. They knew which vehicle carried what. He ended the call without goodbye. "Byung-chul is burning everything I've built." The safe house felt smaller after that. The men moved with heightened vigilance, checking cameras, rechecking weapons, speaking in even lower tones. Amina stayed out of the way, but her mind wouldn't stop working through the variables. "When was the convoy route decided?" she asked that evening. Jae-sung glanced up from his laptop. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, tension carved into the lines of his face. "This morning, 6 a.m. And the attack happened when?" 11:45. Amina processed the timeline. How many people knew the route? 7. All trusted. His jaw tightened. All vetted personally. She moved to the table where he sat, her mind sorting through patterns the way she used to track customer flow during lunch rushes. Looking for the gaps, the anomalies, the things that didn't fit. The decision was made at 6. The attack at 11:45. Amina's fingers drummed against the table. How long does it take to position 3 vehicles on a freeway, coordinate an ambush, and execute it cleanly enough that no one called police? Jae-sung's eyes narrowed. At least 2 hours. Probably 3. So they started moving into position by 9 at the latest. Maybe 8:30. She met his gaze. That's 2.5 hours after the route was decided. How long does it take information to travel through your communication channels? Phone to phone? Seconds. Encrypted relay? Minutes, maybe. Not hours. The weight of the implications settled between them. One of Jae-sung's men, the one with the scar, leaned in from where he'd been monitoring the security feeds. "You're saying they knew before we finalized the route?" "I'm saying they knew too fast for the information to travel through normal channels." Amina's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. Even if someone reported it immediately after the 6 a.m. meeting, there's not enough time to plan and execute an ambush that clean. Unless they were already in position, Jae-sung finished, his expression darkening. "Waiting for confirmation, which means someone told them which route you were likely to choose before the meeting even happened." Amina paused. "Someone who knows how you think, how you plan." The room went silent except for the low hum of the city beyond the windows. Jae-sung stood slowly, his movements controlled but his eyes burning with cold fury. He made a call, speaking rapid Korean that carried an edge sharp enough to cut. When he finished, he looked at the men in the room, really looked at them the way Amina had learned to read customers for tells. "We change protocols," he said. "No advance notice. No set patterns. Nothing moves unless I personally confirm it minutes before execution." The scarred man nodded. "What about the supply run tomorrow?" "Cancelled. Everything freezes until we identify the source." Amina watched the tension ripple through the room. These men had worked together for years, trusted each other with their lives. And now that trust was fracturing. "It's not enough," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Freezing operations slows Byung-chul down, but it doesn't stop the leak. Amina's throat was dry, but she pushed forward. The person feeding him information isn't just reporting what you're planning. They're close enough to know what you're thinking before you plan it. Close enough to predict your decisions. Jae-sung's expression was unreadable. You're talking about someone in this room. I'm talking about someone in your inner circle. Someone who's been with you long enough to know how you operate. She looked around at the faces watching her. Some hostile, some calculating, all dangerous. The timing doesn't work any other way. The information is moving too fast. Real-time fast. Real-time proximity, Jae-sung said softly, understanding crystallizing in his voice. Yes, Amina met his eyes, which means Byung-chul isn't just planning from a distance. He's getting updates from someone who's close enough to see your reactions, hear your conversations, watch your decisions as they happen. The scarred man shifted his weight. That's impossible. We've all been. It's not impossible, Jae-sung interrupted, his voice cutting through the protest. It's just unthinkable. But Amina could see he was already running through possibilities, reassessing loyalties, questioning foundations he'd thought were solid. The trap was tightening, not from outside, from within. Amina took a breath and said the thing everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice. The leak is already inside. Byung-chul made his move at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. No gunfire. No dramatic confrontation. Just a phone call that came through on a line only 3 people knew existed, the emergency protocol Jae-sung had established years ago for catastrophic scenarios. The voice on the other end was breathless, panicked. One of his lieutenants calling from a secondary location. Federal raid in progress at the main warehouse. Assets being seized. Names being collected. They needed to move. Now, Jae-sung was already pulling on his jacket before the call ended. Amina woke to urgent Korean and the sound of weapons being checked. The safe house was in motion, controlled chaos as men grabbed tablets, phones, go-bags. What's happening? She asked, stepping into the main room. We're moving. Jae-sung's voice was clipped, focused. Stay close. But something felt wrong. Amina couldn't name it. Just the same instinct that had made her notice the birds, the reflection, the timing mismatch. A wrongness in the rhythm. Who called? She asked. Minho. Second in command at the West Side operation. Jae-sung was already at the door, his security flanking him. He's never wrong. Amina's chest tightened. How did he know to call this number? It's protocol. Level 1 emergency only. He paused, glancing back at her. Why? Because if the leak knows your protocols, they know your emergency exits too. But it was too late. They were already moving. The descent through the parking structure felt like falling through layers of a trap. Amina counted the security cameras, 4, 5, 6, all positioned to track their route. The vehicles were pre-positioned, engines running, doors open. Everything exactly as planned. That was the problem. Everything was exactly as planned. They split into 2 vehicles. Jae-sung, Amina, and 2 men in one. The rest in the second. Radio silence until they reached the extraction point. A private airfield 40 minutes outside the city. But 10 minutes into the drive, the first checkpoint appeared. Not police. Not federal. Just a black SUV blocking a side street they needed, positioned like it had been waiting. Jae-sung's driver rerouted without hesitation, taking the alternate path. The second checkpoint appeared 6 blocks later. They're hurting us, the scarred man said from the front seat. Jae-sung's jaw was tight. Where's the second vehicle? Radio silence. Where's the second vehicle? He repeated, sharper. Static. Then nothing. The driver took another turn, heading toward downtown where the streets branched in 100 directions. More options. More escape routes. Except every route they tried ended the same way. Blocked, monitored, anticipated. Amina watched the city slide past the windows. Los Angeles at night was all neon and shadow, millions of lives playing out in lit windows and darkened alleys. Indifferent. Fushed. Cold. From inside the car, it felt like drowning in light while no one noticed you were going under. They know the routes, she said quietly. All of them. Jae-sung was already on his phone, calling the emergency number. It rang and rang. No answer. He tried another contact. Same result. Another. Nothing. Min-ho set this up, Amina said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The call was real, but the emergency wasn't. He gave you a reason to move, then fed your routes to Byungchul. Jae-sung's expression was carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed something worse than anger. Betrayal. The kind that cut deeper than bullets because it came from trust deliberately weaponized. He's been with me for 8 years, he said softly. And Byungchul's been planning this for months. Amina's voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. How much did he promise Min-ho? The driver swore in Korean as another blockade appeared ahead, this one with men standing outside the vehicles. Watching. Waiting. We can't go forward, the scarred man said. We can't go back, the driver added. Jae-sung looked at the buildings rising on either side of them. Office towers under construction, scaffolding climbing toward the sky, windows dark and empty. There, he said, pointing. The high-rise, northwest corner. They abandoned the car 3 blocks away, moving on foot through alleys that smelled like garbage and exhaust. The construction site was supposed to be abandoned, but Amina saw fresh tire marks in the dust, footprints too recent to be from day workers. Byungchul had known this route too. Had known Jae-sung would choose height when cornered, would choose unfinished spaces where sight lines worked both ways. Had known because Min-ho had told him how Jae-sung thought. The stairwell echoed with their footsteps. Always up, buying time that was already spent. On the 14th floor, the gunfire started below them. Not a raid, an execution. Jae-sung's remaining men moved to hold the stairwell, and Amina knew with sick certainty that they wouldn't be following. She and Jae-sung kept climbing. 17 floors. 19. 22. The sound of the city was different up here. Muffled, distant, like they'd climbed above the world that had rejected them. Amina found him on the 24th floor, slumped against a half-finished wall, blood soaking through his sleeve where something, bullet, shrapnel, she couldn't tell, had torn through fabric and flesh. His phone was shattered on the concrete beside him. His weapon lay just beyond reach, and in his eyes, she saw something that terrified her more than the blood or the footsteps echoing up the stairwell behind them. Defeat. Get up. Amina pressed fabric torn from her shirt against Jae-sung's wound, her hands steady despite the terror climbing her throat. Blood seeped through, warm and too fast. You should have stayed invisible, he said, voice weak. And you should have listened sooner. She pulled him upright, ignoring his sharp intake of breath. We're not dying in an unfinished building. There's no way out. There's always a way out. Amina's mind was already moving, sorting through options the way she used to calculate which tables to prioritize during rushes. What mattered, what didn't, what could wait, what couldn't. You said you had evidence. On Byungchul. Jae-sung's eyes focused slightly. Files. Financial trails. Proof he's been selling routes to competitors. Where? Encrypted drive. Back at the safe house. He coughed, and Amina saw fresh blood on his lips. Useless now. Not if I can reach it. They'll kill you. They'll kill both of us if we stay here. She helped him toward a window overlooking the city. Light stretched to the horizon. Millions of people living their lives, unaware that 14 floors below, men were climbing stairs with loaded weapons. Who else has access to those files? My attorney. Dead drop protocol. Jae-sung leaned against the concrete, breathing hard. But it doesn't matter. Even if you got them out, what then? Police won't touch this. Rivals won't care. Amina thought about the patterns she'd noticed. The way Jae-sung's organization operated. The rules that governed this world she'd stumbled into. The families Byungchul promised power to, she said slowly. The ones he told would benefit from your death. They don't know he's been selling to competitors, do they? No. Because if they did, it would prove he's loyal to nothing but profit. That he'd sell them out the same way. Understanding crystallized in her voice. In your world, greed is forgivable. But disloyalty isn't. Something shifted in Jae-sung's expression. Not hope, he was too wounded for that, but possibility. If those families saw proof that Byungchul betrayed the entire structure for personal gain, he trailed off, thinking through the implications. They'd burn him themselves. Then we expose him. Amina pulled out her phone, the one Jae-sung had given her, supposedly secure. Give me your attorney's number. What happened next unfolded across digital channels Amina barely understood. Encrypted messages sent to specific accounts. Files transferred through networks designed to be untraceable. Jae-sung guided her through it, his voice growing weaker but his instructions precise. The evidence wasn't dramatic, just numbers, transaction records, communications showing Byung-chul selling exclusive routes to 3 different organizations simultaneously. Proof that his loyalty wasn't to any family, any structure, any code. Proof that he served only himself. Amina sent it to 5 different recipients, family heads, lieutenants, power brokers who lived by rules older than the city surrounding them. She didn't editorialize, didn't explain, just let the numbers speak. In the underworld, that was enough. By the time footsteps reached the 23rd floor, Jae-sung's phone began buzzing with incoming messages. Calls from numbers he recognized, voices asking questions that meant the information had landed exactly where it needed to. The footsteps below them stopped. Voices argued in Korean. Then silence. Then the sound of retreat. Amina held her breath, not daring to believe it could be that simple. But she understood now what Jae-sung had tried to explain days ago. This world operated on reputation. On the understanding that certain violations couldn't be tolerated because they threatened everyone's survival. Byung-chul had violated that understanding, and the families had turned on him faster than any police raid could. The contract, the one that had sent a sniper to a café on a golden afternoon, dissolved not with violence but with judgment. Somewhere in the city, arrangements were being made. Byung-chul's allies were becoming his hunters. Min-ho, who had traded 8 years of trust for empty promises, was discovering those promises had evaporated. The sniper who had missed his shot would vanish without spectacle. Erased by the same system that had hired him, for the same reason the contract existed in the first place. Failure was expensive. Disloyalty was fatal. Amina helped Jae-sung down the stairwell as dawn began breaking over Los Angeles. The construction site was empty. The black SUVs were gone. The city stretched out before them, waking up slowly, indifferent to what had almost happened in its shadows. They reached street level as the first sunlight touched the towers above. Amina called for help, not Jae-sung's people, but paramedics, using a story about a construction accident that would fall apart under scrutiny but wouldn't be scrutinized. As they waited, Jae-sung looked at her with something that might have been respect. You refused to stay invisible, he said quietly. Invisibility only keeps you safe if no one's looking for you. Amina watched the sky brighten. They were already looking. The sirens approached. The city noise returned. Traffic, voices, birds singing in nearby trees. This time, the silence that came before had finally lifted. And Amina knew, watching the light spread across buildings and streets, that they had survived not through force or hiding, but through exposure. Sometimes the only way to stay safe was to make sure everyone was watching. 3 weeks later, Amina stood at the railing of a café overlooking the Pacific. The ocean stretched endless before her, gray-blue beneath overcast skies, waves rolling in with the kind of rhythm that made everything else feel temporary. The café was quiet this early, just a handful of people nursing coffee, reading newspapers, existing without urgency. She heard him before she saw him. I wasn't sure you'd come, Jae-sung said. Amina turned. He looked different. Not just the faded scar on his arm where the bullet had grazed him, or the casual clothes that replaced his usual severity. It was something deeper, a looseness in his shoulders, a softness in his expression that hadn't existed before. He looked like someone who'd remembered how to exhale. You said it was important, Amina replied, studying him carefully. It is. He gestured to a table away from the windows, away from sight lines. Old habits, she supposed. Some things didn't change overnight. I wanted to tell you in person. They sat. A server brought coffee without being asked. Jae-sung must have already ordered. The small gesture felt significant somehow. Planning without control. I'm stepping back, he said simply. selling pieces of the organization, turning the rest legitimate. Real estate, import-export through legal channels. Clean. Amina wrapped her hands around the warm cup, processing. When did you decide this? In that stairwell, when I realized I was bleeding out in an unfinished building, surrounded by people I trusted and systems I'd built, and none of it mattered. His voice was quiet but certain. Or maybe when you refused to let me stay invisible. For me? She asked, though she already knew the answer. For myself. Jae-sung met her eyes. You just reminded me I wanted to live. Actually live. Not just survive. The ocean sound filled the silence between them. Constant, indifferent, enduring. That's not easy, Amina said carefully. What you built, who you were in that world. People don't just walk away. I'm not walking away. I'm transforming it. He leaned back slightly, and she noticed how different his posture was. Less coiled, less ready for violence. The families that turned on Byung-chul understand. They're businessmen first. They respect evolution more than sentiment. And the ones who don't respect it aren't in a position to object. The hardness flickered briefly in his eyes, then faded. I'm not pretending to be innocent, Amina. Just trying to be different than I was. She sipped her coffee, tasting salt air mixed with bitter grounds. What happens to people like Minho, Byung-chul? Gone. Erased. Jae-sung's tone carried no satisfaction, just statement of fact. That world doesn't offer second chances. You know that. Amina did know. She'd seen enough in those weeks to understand how final those consequences were. And you? Jae-sung asked. What are you doing with what survives? She'd thought about this constantly since that morning when the sirens came. About whether she could return to normal life, whether normal even existed for her anymore. I'm opening something, she said slowly, testing the words. A café, community space, hiring people like me, people who notice things others don't, people who learned to read situations to stay safe. Interest sparked in Jae-sung's expression. That's good. That's. I'm not asking for your help, Amina interrupted gently but firmly. He paused, then nodded. Understanding. I wasn't offering help. I was offering respect. Good. She set down her cup. Because I don't want to be your project. Or your redemption. I want to build something that's mine. You should. Jae-sung's voice carried warmth she'd never heard from him before. You already saved my life. You don't owe me anything more. I don't think that's how it works. Amina looked out at the ocean, watching how the light changed as clouds shifted. We changed each other, whether we meant to or not. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. We did. The server returned, refilling their cups. The café was filling slowly with morning regulars. Joggers stopping after their runs, elderly couples sharing pastries, students claiming tables for study sessions. Life continuing in all its ordinary complexity. I have something for you, Jae-sung said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. Not charity, not control, just support. Amina didn't take it immediately. What is it? Down payment help for a lease. In your name. No strings. No ownership. His expression was steady, earnest. You notice what others miss. You think like someone who learned to survive. That's valuable. You deserve the chance to use it your way. She looked at the envelope, then at him. Saw sincerity there, not manipulation. Not debt or obligation. Just recognition of something that had shifted between them. Two people who'd been forced into each other's orbits and had somehow emerged changed rather than destroyed. Amina took the envelope. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you, Jae-sung replied. For the iced tea. Despite everything, she smiled. Worst timing ever. Best timing ever. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll be around. Not watching. Not protecting. Just around. If you need. I know. He walked away, disappearing into the morning crowd, and Amina turned back to the ocean. The waves kept rolling. The birds kept circling. The city kept humming behind her. And for the first time since that golden afternoon when she'd noticed the silence, Amina felt like she could breathe. The space was small, just 16 tables, exposed brick walls, windows facing a residential street in mid-city where families walked dogs and kids rode bikes after school. Not Sunset Boulevard, not Koreatown, somewhere quieter, where people came for conversation rather than to be seen. Amina stood in the empty café, measuring distances with her eyes. Counter here, kitchen access there. Sightlines clear from every angle, not because she was planning for danger, but because she'd learned that feeling safe meant understanding your environment. "It's perfect," said the woman beside her. Amina glanced at Maya, 23, recently arrived from Chicago, carrying the kind of wariness that came from neighborhoods where you learned to notice everything or you didn't make it. She'd responded to Amina's hiring notice with a single line. "I see patterns other people miss." That was enough. "The lease is signed," Amina said. "We open in 3 weeks. That gives us time to build this right." "Build what exactly?" Maya asked, curious rather than challenging. Amina thought about how to explain it. A place where noticing things isn't a survival mechanism, where it's a strength. Over the next weeks, 3 more women joined them. There was Keisha, who'd worked casino security and could read body language like text. Lynn, who'd grown up translating for her immigrant parents and learned to catch meaning in what people didn't say. And Sophia, who'd been a night shift nurse and developed the kind of situational awareness that kept her safe walking to her car at 3 a.m. They weren't running from danger. They were building towards something different. "We're not a shelter," Amina explained during their first meeting, all of them sitting around a single table in the unfinished space. "We're not hiding. We're creating a place where the skills we learn to survive become the skills that help us thrive." "So what does that look like?" Keisha asked. "We hire carefully. We train everyone to notice patterns, customer behavior, timing, environment. We build systems that protect without feeling like prisons." Amina spread her hands on the table. "And we prove that observation isn't weakness or paranoia. It's power." The cafe opened on a Thursday morning in late spring. Word spread slowly at first, mostly through women who understood what Amina was building. A safe space that didn't advertise itself as one. A business that valued awareness over speed, quality over volume, people over profit margins. Customers came because the coffee was excellent. They stayed because something about the place felt different. Safer. Like the staff actually saw them rather than just serving them. Jae-sung visited twice that first month. He didn't announce himself. Didn't take the best table or expect special treatment. Just ordered an Americano, sat by the window, and read his tablet for an hour before leaving a generous but not excessive tip. The second time, Amina sat across from him during a quiet afternoon lull. "It's working," he said, looking around the space. "What you built here." "It's early," Amina replied, though pride touched her voice. "But yes, it's working. You hired well." His eyes tracked to where Maya was restocking the pastry case. Her attention split between the task and the street outside. Not anxious, just aware. "They carry themselves like you do. Like survivors who got tired of just surviving." "Exactly." Jae-sung sipped his coffee. "Have you had any trouble?" Amina knew what he was really asking. Whether his past had followed her here. Whether the world he was leaving behind had noticed what she'd built. "No," she said honestly. "And if we do, we'll handle it. We notice things. Remember?" Something like approval crossed his face. "I never doubted that." He stood to leave, and Amina walked him to the door. A gesture of courtesy, not obligation. "Thank you," she said, "for the help, for respecting boundaries." "Thank you," Jae-sung replied, "for reminding me what it looks like to build something instead of just protecting it." He left, and Amina watched through the window as he disappeared into the afternoon crowd. Not vanishing, not hiding, just living differently than he had before. She turned back to her cafe, her space, her vision, her choice, and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, more like possibility. That evening, as they were closing, Keisha paused mid-wipe of a table and tilted her head. "You hear that?" she asked. Amina listened. At first, just the usual sounds. Traffic, distant conversation, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then she caught it. Birds. Chirping in the trees outside. The sound she'd learned meant safety. The sound that had been absent that day when everything changed. Sparrows, Maya said from the counter, smiling slightly. They nest in those trees every spring. Lynn joined them at the window, all of them watching the small birds flit between branches, filling the air with ordinary song. I grew up thinking noticing the quiet meant danger was coming, Sophia said softly. But maybe sometimes it just means you're finally listening. Amina didn't correct her. Both things could be true. The birds kept singing, audible, unmistakable, alive. And Amina knew, standing in the cafe she'd built with skills learned from necessity, that noticing one small detail hadn't just saved a life. It had rewritten two of them, and given her the chance to help others rewrite theirs. 6 months after opening, Amina found herself back on Sunset Boulevard. Not at the cafe where it all began. That place had closed, unwilling to reopen after the shooting. But nearby, at a small park where office workers ate lunch and tourists consulted maps, trying to orient themselves in a city too vast to ever fully understand. She sat on a bench beneath a ficus tree, coffee in hand, watching the afternoon light paint everything gold. The same quality of light that had existed that day. The same warmth that made danger feel impossible. But this time she heard the birds first. Their chirping filled the air, constant, ordinary, alive. The sound she'd learned meant safety before she'd understood why it mattered. Before instinct became knowledge. Before noticing became the thing that divided one timeline from another. You come here often? Amina turned. Jae-sung stood a few feet away, dressed casually in a way that still looked expensive, but no longer looked dangerous. He carried a tablet under one arm and reading glasses in his shirt pocket, the details of someone who spent more time in boardrooms than shadows. First time back in this neighborhood since. She didn't need to finish. Me too. He gestured to the bench. May I? She nodded, and he sat, leaving respectful distance between them. Not the distance of strangers, but the distance of people who'd learned that proximity wasn't the same as connection. How's the legitimate world treating you? Amina asked. Tedious. Legal. Surprisingly satisfying. A slight smile touched his lips. Turns out I'm decent at real estate development when I'm not worried about being killed. Who knew? They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city move around them. A street musician set up nearby, tuning a guitar. A mother pushed a stroller past, talking on her phone. A teenager on a skateboard navigated the crowded sidewalk with unconscious grace. Normal. Everything was normal. I've been thinking about that day, Jae-sung said quietly. About what you noticed. The birds. The silence. He corrected gently. You noticed what was missing, not what was there. That's different. Amina considered this. She'd thought about it countless times. The moment when instinct became action. When observation became intervention. When her entire life pivoted on a single choice. My mother used to say that when the birds leave, danger's already decided to arrive, she said. I grew up thinking that meant I should run. Hide. Make myself small. But you didn't run. No. Amina watched the birds above them, flitting between branches without fear. I realized that noticing danger isn't the same as being helpless against it. Sometimes seeing what's wrong gives you the chance to do something right. Jae-sung was quiet for a moment. You know what I've realized? You didn't save a criminal that day. No. You saved a future. Yours. Mine. Everyone's who works at your cafe. Everyone whose life is different because I chose to change. He turned to look at her fully. One detail. One choice. Everything transformed. Amina felt something shift in her chest. Not quite closure, but understanding. She'd spent months processing what happened, working through the trauma and fear and strange exhilaration of surviving something that should have destroyed her. But maybe survival wasn't the point. Maybe transformation was. Do you ever regret it? Jae-sung asked. Spilling that tea? She thought about the question seriously. About the violence she'd witnessed, the fear she'd carried, the way her entire understanding of safety had been shattered and rebuilt into something more complex. "No," she said finally, "because the person I was before wouldn't have built what I'm building now. Wouldn't have understood what Maya and Keisha and the others needed. Wouldn't have recognized that observation is power." She paused. "You gave me a reason to use what I'd learned, to transform survival skills into something that helps instead of just protects. And you gave me a reason to want to live beyond just staying alive." Jae-sung stood, preparing to leave. "So I suppose we're even." "I don't think it works like that." "No," he agreed. "Probably not." He walked away, blending into the afternoon crowd, and Amina remained on the bench, listening to the birds sing above her. The sound that meant safety. The sound she'd learned to trust before she understood why. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Afternoon rush starting. When are you back?" Amina smiled and stood, finishing her coffee as she headed toward the street. Her café was 20 minutes away. Her team was waiting. Her life, the one she'd built from the wreckage of that golden afternoon, was continuing. As she walked, a sparrow landed on the sidewalk ahead of her, pecking at crumbs before flying away. Such a small thing, so easy to miss. But Amina had learned that the most important details always were. She thought about the sniper who'd missed, the bullet that shattered glass instead of bone, the choice that rewrote 2 lives and created space for dozens more to be rebuilt. All because she'd noticed what was missing, not the danger itself, the warning before it. Sometimes survival isn't about seeing the threat. It's about noticing the silence, about recognizing when something that should be there, birds singing, safety humming, the ordinary rhythm of the world, has vanished. And understanding that absence is its own kind of information, the kind that saves lives, the kind that changes everything. If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.